I tweeted to Ben Shapiro. I said, I've never seen anything on the Daily Wire that's actually critical of Israel. And he quote tweets me. And at this time, I have 1,000 followers on Twitter. I don't know. I probably got 100 likes on this tweet. It wasn't a viral tweet. He quote tweets me and says, to accuse a Jew of dual loyalty is the surest sign of anti-Semitism. But the second you're like, well, actually, it's the Jews. First of all, it's against my Christian faith. Like, I just don't believe that, and I never will, period. And second, then it becomes a way to discredit. That's when I was like, this guy's a Fed. I'm sorry I called you gay, by the way. But I think I'm just too old or something. I'm like, why is anyone married?
Okay, we're going to get to that last part with Tucker Carlson calling Nick Fuentes gay in just a moment. But first, I actually want to get to the more substantive parts of their discussion because I thought it was important for Tucker to talk about what he disagrees with Nick Fuentes on, because the fact of the matter is they might agree in regard to the undue influence that Israel has over our political system and our government. But I do think that there is a pretty significant distinction between how Tucker Carlson talks about Israel versus how Nick Fuentes, at least historically, has talked about Israel. So with that in mind, why don't we get to the first area of disagreement that they get into? And I want to get your thoughts right after, Cenk.
My Christian faith tells me that there's no such thing as blood guilt, and virtue or sin is not inherited. It's not a feature of DNA. So every person must be assessed individually as God assesses each person individually. And that's like a foundational view. So I always thought it's great to criticize and it's question like our relationship with Israel because it's insane and it hurts us. We get nothing out of it. I completely agree with you there. But the second you're like, well, actually, it's the Jews. First of all, it's against my Christian faith. Like, I just don't believe that, and I never will, period. And second, then it becomes a way to discredit. That's when I was like, this guy's a Fed. What I do think is bad, just objectively bad and destructive, is the all Jews are guilty or all anybody is guilty of anything, because that's just like not true. And we don't believe that as Christians. But I also think there's like a true, not just principle, but like spiritual reality that we have to defend, which is God created every person as an individual, not as a group. No woman gave birth to a community.
Aside from kind of shrouding it in religion and religious doctrine, in terms of my own values and morals, I totally agree with Tucker Carlson on this, right? I don't judge Jewish people as a group. When we're being critical of Israel, we are being critical of specific people and a specific ideology, an expansionist ideology that has led to so much pain, so much suffering, so much destruction and land theft in the Middle East. That is not inherent in a Jewish person, right? And so to blame all Jews or to engage in anti-Semitism, in my opinion, is not only gross, but it's nonsensical. So basically what you see Tucker Carlson doing there is kind of like differentiating the way he handles this issue from how he believes Nick Fuentes has talked about this issue. So we're gonna get the response from Fuentes in just a second because he did defend himself. But before we do, Cenk, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, look, so the only people that, well, that's actually not true. Fuentes is one of the people. The two sets of people, and Tucker has said this before too. There's the Fuentes crowd that says the Jews are the responsible. At least historically, that's what he said. And then there's the pro-Israel crowd that says, no, Israel equals Jews, Jews equal Israel. The people criticizing Israel, the great majority of us, never say Jews because we don't mean Jews. And in fact, a lot of us are Jewish Americans, right? So why would we want to attack our own who are in favor of peace and decency, trying to stop a genocide, etc.? So we don't think like the bigots do. But a lot of the pro-Israel crowd, you have to remember, are deeply bigoted against Muslims. And they think it's okay to kill Muslims, it's no big deal. In fact, we should smear Muslims so it makes it easier for America to give us money to kill Muslims. So they assume everyone is as deeply hateful as they are, And then so they say, okay, so when you say you're criticizing Israel, that means you're criticizing Jews. No, it doesn't mean that at all. You just made that up. You said it, none of us said it, right? So that's point one. And Anna, to your point, look, I'm atheist, I'm a humanist. I find the idea that there's a difference between Palestinians and Israelis or any sets of people is so deeply irrational, I can't countenance it. If aliens landed and you said to them, okay, now those Palestinians and Israelis are dramatically different, they'd be like, bloop, 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 does not, they look exactly the same, they act the same, all these things, except for the fact that they hate each other and then all this conflict, and the Israelis are more powerful now. It's a power dynamic. It happens to all humans. It doesn't happen because they're Jewish. In this case, it's happening despite the fact that they're Jewish and have gone through it themselves culturally over and over again, where they were the victims. In this case, they are not the victims. So look, this stuff is clear to anyone who isn't trying to smear people on behalf of Israel. All right, so now, last thing on this for now is, if you criticize Tucker for having Fuentes on, I get it, we don't have Fuentes on. He said some really vile things, and so I understand the concern around that, right? But Anna, I read several articles today that never showed that clip or mentioned what you just showed us, right? Every single one of them said Tucker Carlson brought on Fuentes to share his anti-Semitic point of view. But wait, we just saw with our own eyes, that is nothing but a total lie. And Anna, as you know, this is a lie that they did to me. I had David Duke on to figure out what the hell's going on with this crazy right wing, and I called him an anti-Semite and a bigot and a racist to his face. And the mainstream media said I had David Duke on to share his anti-Semitic views. So yeah, James, there is a giant liar in this equation, and it's not the part of the media that constantly gets blamed.
I can't emphasize enough how toxic the trend of quick clips on X or Instagram, just the quick clips, how toxic that really is, because it really does take the context out of the discussion, and it paints a narrative that oftentimes isn't even accurate. And so that's why now producing this show is almost a Herculean task, because I'm not going to rely on a few clips I found on X. I want to watch the whole conversation and get a more holistic, perception of what the conversation was and what actually went down. So whatever, putting that aside for a second.
I'm just gonna add real quick, Anna. It's because almost all of media is lying. So then we all have to fact check every single thing that anyone else has ever said. And like in the old days, you thought New York Times at least wasn't lying. No, they're giant liars.
You can't, look, the buck has to stop with you if you're in the media. And we're overwhelmed. There's so much to do every day. And so I understand people relying on these shortcuts, just relying on the clips that like Aaron Rupar clipped out or some other rando on X. But you can't do that. You need to have the fuller context and really understand how the conversation went down. So you just heard Tucker's views and what his values are. Now, Nick Fuentes is going to defend himself. Let's hear what he has to say.
Not to be that guy and say that thing, but like, my best friend is a Jewish person. Clearly, the state of Israel and the neocons are deeply motivated by that ethnic identity, and their allegiance to Israel proceeds from that. Because of their unique heritage and story, which is that they're a stateless people, they're unassimilable, they resist assimilation for thousands of years, and I think that's a good thing. And now they have this territory in Israel. There's a deep religious affection for the state. It's bound up in their identity, the story of the Exodus from Egypt, the promise of the land, all these things. For the international Jewish community, they're extremely organized, and many of them are critical of Israel or Israel's current government or the project of Israel. But I guess what they have in common, unlike, let's say, like Singapore, for example, is that they have this international community across borders, extremely organized, that is putting the interests of themselves before the interests of their home country. And there's no other country that has a similar arrangement like that.
Okay, but to say that it's all like it's inherent in all Jews, like all Jews sign on to what's happening right now in Gaza, like it's just not true. It's literally not true. The most vocal critics of what Israel is doing right now happen to be Jewish. Okay, I mean, come on. You have Dave Smith, Katie Halper, Glenn Greenwald. The list goes on and on and on. There's so many.
Ben Cohen.
Robert Greenwald. Exactly. There are so many. And so, look, whenever you start making judgments about groups simply based on their heritage or their racial identity or what, you lose me entirely. Because I think it is important to judge people as individuals as opposed to a collective, right? A collective that is based on immutable characteristics. And so I disagree with how Nick Fuentes comments on this issue because he seems to have difficulty differentiating from people who have bought into an expansionist policy in the Middle East versus just Jews who criticize it, who are not co-signing onto it at all.
Yeah. So look, this is a topic where even having an intellectual conversation is career threatening, right?
It's uncomfortable.
Yeah.
It's totally uncomfortable.
Right. So let's, but I'm gonna do it anyway. So first of all, in terms of genetics, there's no difference between us. There's so much more variability within any race or religion than there is between the different races and religions. So I don't want to get too deep into the science of that, but to make an assumption based on someone's race or religion in terms of their hardware, their genetics is just preposterous, comically ignorant, okay? So now, is there such a thing as culture that also affects us? Yes. Are there different forms of the culture? Yes. Are there positives and negatives within every culture? Yes, right? And I've talked about my own culture, Turkish culture originally, et cetera, and some of the wonderful upsides and some of the significant downsides, right? Now, you can say that about your own culture, you can say that about a lot of different cultures, but there's some cultures, if you say it about it, then you're okay, then you're gonna be driven from public life and you're all these terrible names and you're canceled, et cetera, right? So now in the case of Jewish culture, I think, and I've said this a million times on the show, it has these beautiful parts to it, and I grew up in a town that was about half Jewish, and so I grew up in that culture and I loved it. You challenge the rabbi, you challenge authority, you stand up for the powerless. That's why the Jewish Americans were a huge part of the civil rights movement. I can go on and on. Is there a part of the culture that says we are perpetual victims? Yes. Is that because they have been perpetual victims throughout history? Yes. But does it make, is there a problem within that strand? My real opinion is, yeah, there is a problem, which is if you teach all your kids that the whole world hates you and you should be super protective of your people, and you should, and even preemptively so, because the whole world is gonna attack you at any moment and your life is constantly in danger. I think that is not a positive thing to teach kids. Now, it's easy for me to say, I didn't grow up as someone who's Jewish, and they had all the pogroms and the Holocaust, et cetera. So I get it, I get the PTSD from all of that stuff. So now the last part of culture, Anna, is here we are in America. I don't know how Jewish folks are in Australia and Peru, et cetera, but here in America, there's a huge divide, and we can see it in the polling. And that's younger Jewish Americans and older Jewish Americans. So younger Jewish Americans are at this point more on the side of the Palestinians than they are of Israel. Like I'm generalizing based on the polls that I've seen, but for example, earlier today we talked about how 67% of Jewish voters under the age of 45 are backing Mamdani in the mayoral race in New York. Okay, as an example. So why is there a divide between the older Jewish Americans and the younger ones? Because the older ones are closer to the PTSD of the Holocaust, of being stateless, of all these things that are legitimate concerns for Jewish folks throughout the world and throughout history, right? So they're much more protective of this idea of Israel and oh my God, Israel, we got everything. They can't see clearly. No, Israel has nukes. Israel has Iron Dome. Israel has a bigger and more effective military than the entire Middle East combined. So it's a grown-up country now. Whereas younger Jewish Americans grew up as Americans. And so they were partly brainwashed. All cultures brainwashed. I was brainwashed as a Turk growing up. And by the way, against the Armenian genocide never happened. They were hiding behind their civilians. We were just moving them, et cetera. So this is not specific to Jews at all. right? So when he generalizes about the Jews, it's absurd. It's absurd on genetic grounds, on demographic grounds, age, etc. But are there some folks in America that love Israel and love Israel more than they love this country and are more obsessed about it and spend tons of money on it and try to cancel people and fire anyone who would criticize Israel? Of course there are. If you say there aren't, you're definitely lying, and you have to look into why you're lying, right? So I don't agree with Fuentes. He's getting it wrong in an important way. But Tucker didn't agree with any of that.
No, he didn't. In fact, he also told Fuentes that anti-Semitism is actually very convenient for the bad faith actors who are seeking to essentially justify anything and everything that Israel is carrying out. So let's just hear how Fuentes responded to that.
I would just say I disagree. I mean, because you said the other day, they like me. I don't know what you're talking about when you say that. Because
I don't know.
Let me just kind of rebut that.
Well, by the way, I'm not saying you have anything to do with this. I'm just saying I've noticed the phenomenon.
Totally, and I just reject that because they have been messing with me for my entire adult life. I mean, the ADL got me banned on YouTube. The SPLC posted my house on their website. I mean, as far as the Jews are concerned, I think that, like I said, you cannot actually divorce Israel and the neocons and all of those things that you talk about from Jewishness, ethnicity, religion, identity.
Yeah, I'm 100% on Tucker's side. And by the way, for those who are critical of the expansionist project that's currently being carried out by Israel, and you are justified in being critical about that. It is not based on someone's immutable characteristics. It's not based on people's identity as Jewish people. It has everything to do with an ideology that is being carried out by a government, okay? That, by the way, is not just supported by Jewish individuals within Israel and maybe globally, but also, more importantly, evangelicals as well. So it's not about an identity, it's about an ideology. And that's what's important to me, because there's no one in the world who's gonna convince me to have hatred in my heart for Jewish people or Black people or gay people. For me, the ideology and the actions that individuals carry out is way more important to focus on. And what I can't stand is that people who understand that distinction and do not have malice or hatred in their hearts end up getting lumped together with those who do have malice and hatred in their hearts. And that was the point that Tucker Carlson was trying to make there.
Yeah, I gotta say the last two things here. First, it makes no sense to say the Jews or Jewishness, as Fuentes is saying. So wait, Dave Smith and Ben Shapiro disagree 100%. So which one represents the Jews? It just, you can't make sense out of that, right? And as we've said a million times on the show, look, we've got friends, family that are Jewish, and Mossad never called them, IDF never called them. They're physics professors. They're doing physics. They're not doing anything else. So like that, all of that is absurd. Now, on the other hand, with the Ben Shapiro's of the world, he says, oh, it's a dual loyalty trope, saying that we're loyal to Israel, and this has been going on for all of eternity. Israel started in 1948. How could it have been going on for eternity? So I feel like sometimes they're planting the pro-Israel guys are planting these so-called tropes around so that anything triggers them, and then you're canceled forever for criticizing Israel in a super convenient way. And they say the dual loyalty thing, and then they say Mamdani is actually loyal to jihadi terrorists and not America. Wait, isn't that the dual loyalty trope? And in a much more vicious and bigoted way, and based on absolutely nothing? So apparently you don't mind the dual loyalty trope. You just mind if anyone criticizes Israel, you like that you get to use that newfound trope to criticize them. So guys, this is super simple. The only people who don't get it are the neo-Nazis and the dumbass mainstream media that work for Israel, okay? Jews and Israel are not the same thing. We love Jewish Americans, they're our brothers and sisters, and we always protect them. And Israel is a foreign government that is committing a genocide, and we've got to get them to stop. Easy, I solved it. Every time you ring the bell below, an angel gets his wings. Totally not true. But it does keep you updated on our live shows. Every time you ring the bell below, an angel gets his wings. Totally not true. But it does keep you updated on our live shows.